right, it says we're live.
All right.
Hey.
Well, we think we're live, assuming that Big Brother's working. Um, so excited for folks to be joining us today. If you could, in the chat, just share, your name, where you're from, your role, and why you're joining us, that'd be great. We're going to give folks another minute or two to join, and then I'll start with some bios, and we'll dive right in. All right. Well, I'm excited for everyone to be with us today. And those of you that are going to be watching this at like 1 a.m., because it's being recorded, glad that we're helping you fall asleep. No, I'm kidding. I hope that's not the case. But excited to moderate our panel today. Excited for this session called Looking Back, Planning Forward. We've got three awesome panelists that I'm really excited to be able to have a conversation with and learn from. Just so that we're all kind of normed. Obviously, there's the chat. Feel free to be putting questions or thoughts into the chat. Would love this to be as interactive as possible. My name is Mark Camaducci. I'm lucky enough to have been in the ed space for a couple of years now, both as a school leader, as a superintendent, as a teacher, all that good stuff. And now I have an education consulting firm, and we're lucky enough that we get to partner with CPICS on a couple of things. And excited to be able to moderate today. We've got three great panelists, and I'm just going to do a quick intro and bio, and then we'll dive in. First, we have Tracy Kornstrom. I think I pronounced it right. Who has served as the director of Wolf Creek Online High School since 2003. Wolf Creek is Minnesota's only hybrid online high school, which offers students an online experience while still offering the advantages of face-to-face interaction several days per week. I assume that was well before COVID, so good job planning for the current reality about 17 years ago. She's been very involved in the creation of online learning legislation in the state of Minnesota, as well as in organizations that promote quality online choices for students and families. She has served on the Minnesota Association of Charter Schools Board of Directors from 2009 to 2011, as well as on the Government Affairs Committee. She was a founding member of the Minnesota Organization for K-12 Online Learning Alliance, a group, and served as a member of Legislative Committee for several years. She has taught in an adjunct capacity for Hamline University, teaching classes on the topics of leadership in organizations. Thanks for joining us, Tracy.
Thank you.
We have Jacqueline York from Venture Academy Online Teacher Project Specialist. She holds multiple subject teaching credentials, a Master's of Education degree, and is currently finishing her PhD in mind-brain education. She's taught in private, public, and charter schools in grades 2 through the university level, so tri-sector experience, which is awesome. And she's had the added benefit of having the experience of homeschooling all three of her children for 8 years, and she's also an associate professor at the College of Education at Hope International University. Jackie, thanks for joining. I think you're the only person I've ever met that has lived in all four sectors of education on a panel like this: private, parochial, charter, and homeschool, which is the reality of some of our kids and families on a daily basis now, trying to navigate all that. So thanks for joining. And then we have Cedric Harrison. He's the Director of Strategic Accounts for Otis, a veteran of K-12 education. He's worked for large and small K-12 businesses and in South Carolina State Department of Education, specializing in student assessment, data analysis, and special education services. Cedric, thanks for joining. If Cedric gets up and runs out, just so everyone knows, it's because his daughter is about to have a baby and she's probably in labor. So we're going to give him the grace where if he just zooms off, we know why. Congratulations. We're not going to think that you got bored and just decided to leave us.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Great. So today's session, looking back, planning forward, we decided to group it in sort of three categories, with the idea of how our panelists of experts leveraged teams, how they leverage tools and resources, and then how they leverage or thought about just instruction and instructional planning in this current moment, obviously, that we're all grappling with, how their prior experiences framed that, and then where this could lead them, their schools, and all of us collectively as we move forward. So we're going to go through that order of teams, then tools, resources, then instructional planning. And we are going to start with Tracy. So Tracy has talked about how her school, which is a small charter school, embraced the values of site-based governance and teacher voice during the pandemic, something that's top of mind, I think, for everyone. So Tracy, we would love it if you could just share a bit about how your school used its disaster assistance relief team, your PLC teams, and other committees to pivot to the new normal. And as you're sharing, it would be great if you could specifically talk about, how you increased stakeholder engagement, how you ensured your teachers or really other stakeholders as well felt heard, and then how you continue to just build trust during the pandemic.
Yep, great. Thank you. Um, just remind me on the time too if I need a prompt on the time. So I work at Wolf Creek Online High School. We say we were hybrid before hybrid was cool in the pandemic. So our campus was open Tuesdays and Thursdays. It actually still is. Our last day of campus is tomorrow. After that, we'll be moving 100% virtual due to cases in Minnesota. So last spring, it was a little bit different. We didn't have as much time. We have known for about a month that we're moving back into virtual. And the teams that we had working as a charter school, number one, a lot of teacher voice on our school board. 3 teachers are part of our school board. So any motions, recommendations, or anything COVID related that came through the board, there's always that voice there. But 2 really independent groups are PLC group of teacher leaders and professional learning communities came together. And at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a thought of like, let's stop doing everything. Let's stop teacher evaluation. Let's stop having PLC meetings on Wednesdays because it's like we're in a pandemic. We're overwhelmed. We can't take on anymore. So we kind of took a pause, took a step back, and said, we're a virtual school. Our curriculum is already online. This is a major barrier for other schools that they're spending hours and hours and hours doing. So, how can we continue to have best practices? We can reduce, we were on campus one Wednesday a month from 9 to 3. We went virtual from 10 to 12, made some changes, knew that sitting virtually together from 9 to 3 was not a great idea. So taking a lot of breaks, getting things prepared ahead of time, but allowing that teacher group to come together, work on a lot of self-care, and continuing to move forward. We 2 years ago started a curriculum conversion that had to happen this fall, COVID or not COVID, because we were halfway into the conversion. So how could we support people? Everything wasn't going to stop. And then the disaster assistance relief team is myself, guidance counselor, mental health counselors, and 5 teachers. And we made a decision every other week for families, students, particularly parents, students, and then staff. We would send out surveys and really use those surveys to look at what was coming next. And the first question on the survey was just, how are you feeling? How is your state of mind on a scale of 1 to 10? What help do you need? What assistance do you need? And from those surveys, we found that staff were feeling isolated, that they did want to get together for social time, that they wanted to have opportunities and hangouts just to eat lunch together and not just talk about a list of agenda items and staff items, that they wanted time individually with myself as administrator and our dean of students to talk about their fears, really specifically, like what happens if my 4 kids have to stay home all next year? What kind of leave can I take? And they didn't want to talk about that in a staff meeting. So from large group projects to putting people into cohorts, I'm working on the curriculum project and really leveraging those teams, working together to motivate each other to move through the spectrum. I mean, We were fearful, of course, that we were going to lose a lot of teachers, and I think a lot of small schools have seen that. Even though we're virtual, we felt that pull as well. We have lost one teacher who felt like she just needed to focus on her family this year, but besides that, we've really been able to leverage the surveys. I think, continuing to be confidential with people's information has been important, but coming back and saying on the survey, which we've again used this fall when we reopened, people would feel more comfortable if we had plexiglass. People would feel more comfortable if we had temperature checks. And everything that people have asked for with the CRF funds, we've been able to do. So I think we've just seen a really great turnaround, even though we're going back to virtual. Staff have said, I'm so glad we had the 3 months together. I'm so glad we were able to come together, see our students, get Chromebooks into their hands, get prepared. And we always thought we would probably be going back to a virtual time for at least a couple months, and we'll be doing that next week. So that's us.
Great. Thank you for sharing. Cedric, then Jackie, anything that from your experience, kind of building on what Tracy shared, that you would want to kind of share with the group today, specifically around you, your team, your school's experience in leveraging teams or norming structures at your schools during the pandemic?
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. I'm coming from a little bit of a different lens because I'm on the vendor side versus the practitioner side. But one of the things I wanted to share is that Otis, which stands for Organizing Technology for Us, we're a company of educators. So 90% of our staff are practitioners or former practitioners. So we've been teachers, administrators at different levels. Even me, I've worked at the Department of Education. And so what happened when the COVID-19 pandemic came about, our focus was very different than a traditional business on, worried about our bottom line and things of that sort. What we were thinking about was what can we do as educators who understand exactly what the challenges are that schools are going to be facing in K-12 during this pandemic, having to figure out how to flip the switch, having to figure out what resources are going to be needed to support them. We sat down and brought our teams together to determine what we could do to try to assist and try to help supplement education in the K-12 space. So one of the things that we did is we decided that we would use our platform to create a virtual school for the remainder of the school year with supplemental curriculum, not to replace school, but to create supplemental curriculum and offer that at no cost to all school districts and parents and families, individuals in the country that wanted to subscribe to the service. So we placed information out so that folks could register. And what we did was we used our staff that are certified teachers to create curriculum for each grade level. And we used our non-certified teacher staff as co-teachers. So the co-teachers supported things like grading assignments and helping with communication, while the certified teachers focused heavily on building some consistent curriculum that was going to help students not have loss in things like reading and math and science, social studies during this time by creating a supplemental school. And that was very helpful for us to feel like we were not focused on making money during this time, but really trying to support educators in the field that we love so much.
Great. Jackie, how about yourself?
Yeah. Well, we actually are a network of 6 charter schools, and we serve 6 counties across Southern California. We have about 10,000 students, and we have a continuum of programs ranging from complete 5-day-a-week site-based programs to hybrid 2-day-a-week, 3-day-a-week in the classroom to completely online. So we had also been, in the business of providing hybrid and online instruction back before it was cool too, Tracy. And so that was really important for us to be able to leverage teams that way. And one nice thing that we were well positioned for, we have a really strong internal teacher pathway system. And so we have teachers that are on different levels based on their areas of expertise and their experience. And so we have emerging teachers to teacher leaders to master teachers. We have a PL cohort, and then we have gurus. And so some of these are paid positions. And so we had a pool of 500 teachers that we could pull from, some of which were already teaching online. And so we just really ramped up professional development back in March, and we started putting together a weekly training schedule that really utilized a lot of our teachers that were online instructors. just to help bring along those that had been site-based that were making that transition. Back in March in California, where our schools exist, we went completely virtual, immediately. And so one of the biggest things for us was just being able to coordinate and curate all of this information and these resources that were coming in. It was really important for somebody to take the lead in doing that. And so we actually developed a course. We had it existing already, but it's our Teaching the Springs Way course. And then that's where we just housed and curated all of these trainings. So we did live trainings that people could jump in the morning on their lunch break and then at the end of the day. But we also video recorded them. And so they then became on-demand trainings that our teachers could access, later as well. Plus, all of the other teams. So our counselors, and so we did Child Find. Our nutrition services continue to provide breakfast and lunch for all of our students and all the neighboring school districts who had been on spring break and were able to provide lunches. So, but that was a big part, was really just being able to find somebody to take the lead and then curate and communicate everything.
Gotcha. Great. Yeah, if anyone follows me on social media, which obviously no one does, but this idea of curating has been top of mind for me, especially back in March and April. There was so much information coming out so quickly by so many people that I feel like one of the highest levers that school leader or leadership teams could do is just like coalescing, weeding out some of the noise and really helping their folks stay focused around their mission, their vision, their beliefs, because, we were all just drowning in the reality. And then this like information flood from so many different folks. So really interesting point. And maybe we'll get to that a little more as we move on. Yeah. But now we want to pivot into our next sort of area, which again, first we were talking about teams. Now we're going to talk about tools and resources, where Cedric's going to take the lead. Obviously, he already shared a little bit about the seat that he sits in as a support to schools. But Cedric, what we're curious to hearing about from you is, from your experience, what, knowing that schools have had to take on or utilize new tools or resources or utilize their existing in maybe a new way, would love to hear a little bit about from you and your experience of, what tools have schools shifted to in this time of crisis, whether it be for remote learning or something else that the school was grappling with. Did you see any examples where schools repurposed the tool in a new way to face the reality and the current crisis? And then just, big picture, just sort of any lessons that, you learned or want to share from using those tools or shifting them in this current reality, specifically around remote learning?
Absolutely. So, one of the big challenges initially was how is instruction going to be delivered to students leaving the traditional in-classroom setting in a school system that wasn't necessarily set up initially to be ready to just kind of split the switch overnight. So schools had to meet and the teams had to get together and had to figure out answers to those questions. One of the things, just from a general perspective, is a lot of schools began to look at learning management systems and learning management platforms in a different light and as a very popular resource in this pandemic environment, because they offered an opportunity to take curriculum, organize it, package it in a way, and be able to deliver it to students. One of the things that I think was a big challenge that folks in the school space did not understand or did not realize was that having a lot of different forms of technology is great in the school system, but then when you move to a remote setting, there are a lot of barriers, a lot of challenges that are created by having to now have access to those systems and also being able to have access to all of those systems. So one of the things, just to talk a little bit about how Otis kind of handled or tried to support education in this space, was through our platform. Our platform has basically 4 different buckets. It has the management resources, also does things like standards-based rating, assessment, and data analytics. From the learning management standpoint, as I mentioned in the previous segment, we were able to build a virtual school using our learning management platform for people that don't use our product. We wanted to be helpful to anybody in education that needed support and for families. So to build out a platform that will allow students to have access to curriculum that they can use to supplement their learning was an awesome experience for us. But we also had a customer base that we needed to support, and our product was primarily designed initially for them in classroom instructional settings. But what we realized immediately was that this tool is completely convertible to remote learning. And so we began to communicate the message to our client base and to others that you can utilize the LMS functionality in this tool for various purposes. Number one, you can package your curriculum. Number two, you can communicate to not only just students but also families about everything that's going on that you would normally do in a normal school day. And you're able to actually resume your instructional day just using a virtual format versus an in-class format. Um, some of the things that we wanted to make sure, just generically and specifically to Otis, you have to have a tool that's flexible. You have to have something that's informative, but also easy to use. I have a daughter right now, a young daughter that's in grade school, and she is in remote learning. And those tools, from a remote standpoint, you can run into glitches and issues when you aren't necessarily familiar with technology, where tools are doing all different kinds of things through the day. So if you're listening to remote learning, it sounds very different than in-classroom instruction. So having a tool that's easy for the educators to use, as well as for the students to use, is very important. And then also having a component for families to be able to access that information and understand how to support their student. So having a level of consistency there is important. To speak about maybe one of the lessons learned, one of the things that we figured out was that in order to really clearly understand how well your remote learning is working, you have to have some type of disclosure of what's going on with the student on a day-to-day basis. So we began developing user usage reports, which allow the educational administrators to see, okay, who's logging into remote learning, who's performing at a high level, what challenges are we having, who's not getting into the system, and what are they not learning, and things of that sort. And then being able to take that data and make informed decisions to make adjustments during the pandemic and during this time when we're trying to make sure that the consistency of the educational delivery is at the same level that it is when we're in classroom.
Great. I'm sure both Tracy and Jackie, you have some thoughts to share about tools, resources, during, and maybe in the future a little bit. So I'd love to hear, Jackie, you first, and then Tracy, just what your schools, your teams did, new things you might have been doing or incorporated from a tools resource perspective, reutilizing or envisioning current tools. Just would love to hear what worked and what you all have done for your stakeholders.
All right. Well, we're a mastery-based school, so we have grade level ICANs, which are the foundational skills or standards that are written in student-friendly language for every grade level. And that's what really drives our pacing throughout the school year in all of our programs. And so it starts with the diagnostic, and then from there it's students have specific ICAN trackers so that they can set goals and then learn and practice the different skills, and then they can track their mastery of them before moving on to another one. And we have mastery quizzes and mastery assignments that they use to demonstrate their proficiency, and then we have benchmarks throughout the year. So that's our model in all of our programs. So for us, it was really looking at, and then there's a continuum, of course, where they are, novice, apprentice, and then become mastery. So their students are moving along this continuum. But for us, it was important for us to be able to now look at how students are learning the material, how content is being provided to them, and then making that shift from our programs that were, site-based and face-to-face to moving all of that online. And it kind of goes back, Mark, what we were talking about a little bit earlier too, as far as, all of that overload. It's almost overwhelming because we had so many. We create pathways for students that give them choice as far as how they're going to learn the content and different resources. And so we asked our teachers to send us, their best top 3 resources for each of these, standards for each of these grade levels. And they're just giving us so much stuff, and it's almost overwhelming. So for us, we needed to, again, curate and then simplify. So one of the things that we did is we created an open classroom, and we just immediately It allowed some of our site-based teachers to kind of catch their breath and kind of settle in and deal with whatever they were dealing with at home, leverage our online teachers and a lot of the content that we already had accessible to us online. And we put it in an open classroom. We made it virtual public to the world. We had 150 teachers that joined that weren't Springs teachers. We had thousands of students from across the globe, join and take advantage of that. And so it became a place where all of our teachers then could access that content, and it was available to students. And then we also did some math springboard courses because we recognized we did that over the summer because we thought that we would start back up in the fall and there was going to be this gap of learning. And so over the summer, we used our expert teachers to create a 3-week independent study. These are the essential math skills that you're going to need at any grade level. And all of our teachers just placed their students into the fall. And then that gave teachers this year in fall kind of an opportunity to catch up and figure out what we were doing. Were we going back on site? Were we staying online? And we're still completely virtual, all of us at this time. But yeah. And then we use iReady too, I'll just say, and they made a lot of resources free for us. And so we use that a lot. If anybody's familiar with it, it's part of our open classroom. And then a lot of the curriculum we created ourselves.
All right, this is Tracy. I'll hop into, I think we just utilized the tools that we had already in different ways, and really just like synchronous sessions, we used Google Hangouts, and it's crazy to think even a year ago that we were mostly using those with adults. Some math tutoring sessions with students, but we were not utilizing them in the way that we should have been, and finding the time to have longer meetings there for students, parents, recording, and making sure that you're using all the features that you could use in those tools. Upgrading to Google Enterprise so we can get all those tools was really important. In the pandemic, we were on break and then never came back. So having virtual staff meetings daily and really having conversations around why do students come to campus. We kind of like use that as our claim to fame was campus. Students were there Tuesdays and Thursdays for the most part, 60 to 70% of the students. Our staff were in every Wednesday together. So even though we were a virtual school with virtual curriculum, a lot of times meeting times and grouping times, we would go to that face-to-face denominator, and we didn't have that anymore. So that's what the pandemic forced us to really think about, and I think really moved us in a way that propelled us forward. In Minnesota, the governor and the commissioner of education had a huge motto that you should not lay off any staff members who wanted to continue to work, whether that be cafeteria people, bus drivers, paraprofessionals. So trying to find ways for our paraprofessionals to continue engaging when they were really involved in face-to-face work made the creation of a virtual campus, just a virtual help desk, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., which is when essentially campus was open. And they were there just as staff, not necessarily maybe to answer a question about trigonometry or calculus, because they might not be able to, I might not be able to, but just to answer a question about where do I find this document, where do I find the information in the weekly news blast, how do I get in touch with my math teacher, what is the best way to do this? And we're starting that again next week as we move back into virtual. Worked out really, really well to have one place that students could go, sometimes just to say, I'm living in a pandemic and I'm taking care of my 2 younger siblings and I'm just really frustrated today, and having a person there all the time to talk to them, give them the resources that they needed. We just had a really nice time running some contests, and their kids kind of figured that out. If they popped in there, they got their name and a hat for a gift card. So some students would pop in quite a bit. And then from that, students also asked through our licensed guidance counselor to have a time that wasn't academic, really similar to our staff time, where it was just a peer time on Mondays, where they weren't talking about math, they weren't talking about passwords, they were just talking about living in a time that was really scary. So that became a great way too for us to share a lot of resources. And for me, a personal win is after 7 years of asking our licensed mental health professionals to do some telehealth and being told you couldn't do it because of HIPAA and all these forms, and it's not HIPAA compliant. Once the pandemic hit, within a week, they were all doing telehealth, and we realized that sometimes people are saying you can't do this, it's impossible, and then you believe them, and then these things happen, it opens new doors. that I hope in the future we'll continue to see a lot of telehealth work and a lot of virtual work, and people not saying that's impossible. We can only do that face to face, because I think we've learned we can do a lot of things virtually. We can do so many things that will propel us forward. So just excited for that in the months to come.
Great. That idea that like, oh, this was impossible in February, and now it's like the norm or
Yes.
expected. It's been fascinating, I think, for everyone. I've been really leaning into the belief of pandemic as a portal. Like, let's use this as a time to like, let's not try to get back to normal. Right? Like, I don't know why we would strive for that if we think that there's room to improve. But want to keep us on track because soapbox comes out way too often over here. So we talked about leveraging teams. We talked about leveraging tools and resources. Now we want to talk really about instructional practices. So we're going to turn over to Jackie. Jackie, we can all agree that the purpose of leveraging teams, the purpose of leveraging tools and resources is to ensure student learning, whether that be academic, social, emotional, or other, both in times of calm and in times of crisis like we're facing right now. So would love to just hear a little bit about, your experience at your schools. In this current reality, what have you all identified as some of the core components of successful distance learning, specifically around community building and relationships as well as academics? Would love to hear a little bit about like if there's a canned distance learning lesson, what that looks like, sounds like, entails. And then, just some from your seat, like best practices either before COVID or that you've learned as a school community since then, around distance learning, around meeting this current reality and the modalities that we're all utilizing.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, I would say one of the first things that we've learned and that we realize is that you really can't just recreate, the classroom online. So we don't put our, students in front of the camera 6 hours on Zoom, and so for us it's really important to be able to look at instruction in terms of what we were going to provide asynchronously and then synchronously. And as Cedric mentioned earlier, like the importance of a learning management system. So we use Canvas. That's our learning management system. We always had it, but it just became so important to be able to have that virtual classroom that students, can access and they know where to go and what to do. And so we made some non-negotiables as it related to the learning management system. So every course had to have a homepage and lesson content, and it had to have weekly and daily checklists so students know what was expected of them, on a daily basis and a weekly basis. As far as the asynchronous instruction, we use a lot of outside personalized ability-based programs that we can embed and link to, but we also created our own lessons, and we can create a lot of them that are, quite similar to the classroom where there is direct instruction. We're teaching the key essential lessons. They're mini lessons. Students are distracted. We can't expect them to sit through what we would consider a complete lesson that we would deliver in a classroom. It's got to be really engaging and interactive and, use multimedia and all of those things. And we also really needed to still provide scaffolded instruction. So the ability for us to have a lesson that, has audio where they're hearing the teacher on a daily basis and the teacher's reading aloud, and they're able to read it themselves independently, but they're also able to click on it and listen to the teacher reading it to them, so they can do shared reading, or those students who aren't reading at all to be able to just listen to it. And so a lot of those best practices in the classroom we can still, accomplish in an online lesson. So those are really important. But students can also choose how they're going to demonstrate their learning. So they could share with the media recording, or they have their choice of what they're going to upload, whether it be a file or a link to something. So we can give them a lot of choice. And that's important. And then the synchronous instruction are those live sessions. And so we really, really embrace the flipped classroom model, where we are providing the instruction in these well, created, developed mini lessons, and then we're coming along and supporting the instruction. So we did whole group instruction, we did small group instruction, small groups. We have ACEs for most of our teachers. Those are assistant classroom educators that taught some of the small groups and the one-on-one. And so that's a place where, again, you can't just lecture, but you can do a lot of that formative assessment and that checking for understanding. It was important for us to always have announcements in the course so that they're logging in regularly, and it's really dynamic. We're celebrating things. We're running incentives and letting them know how students are doing. And then even an opportunity for us was really relationship, and like you said, building community. And so those live sessions, the ability to do lit circles and clubs and a lot of those things we could still do in live sessions that we had done in the classroom. We do exit tickets every week where we have questions and the parents actually kind of interviewing the student on how the week went and what went well and what were you excited about and what do you need help with. And so that opportunity to build community even between the teacher and the student and the parent has been really valuable for us. So synchronous instruction, asynchronous instruction, announcements, feedback, and we can give feedback to students, in the moment during live sessions, but also we could provide audio feedback or video feedback. We send video emails to our students, and so there's a lot you can do, like Tracy said, in an online environment, sometimes even better than you can do in a classroom in some respects. So
great. So Tracy, Cedric, anything that you would like to share as well in terms of, leveraging, rethinking, pivoting instructional practices because of this, or things that you were doing prior, directly or in your supportive schools that really came to light as a benefit in this current reality?
Yeah, I definitely think the relationships is going to be key. It's not just about putting curriculum online. I think we need to leverage teachers, staff, paraprofessionals, assistants, and really look at that. I think teachers obviously moving from a complete face-to-face model. I know in Minnesota there are some teachers teaching still in a hybrid model in front of a group A, and then group B is online behind them. And there's just a lot that we're asking teachers to do. But I know the calls that we're getting of people leaving more traditional schools and coming to our school is because they're saying, my student's not getting feedback, they're not getting any attention in the classroom, they feel like the teacher is overwhelmed. We have to start with helping teachers, finding ways to help them through this because they're going to be the key to helping students. For us, for curriculum, we really changed. We're a high school 9 through 12, so we really changed an online advisory course that we had that was much more dependent on tomorrow on campus, check in with your advisor. Our advisors are called learning managers. So each teacher has 25 students who they do check in with. So we really changed that advisory course to now be something that looks a little bit different as to like how to be a virtual learner, best practices in virtual learning, how to access Google Hangouts, how to make yourself a checklist, and not depending on those face-to-face moments because we might not get them. And then also really having synchronous sessions, like Jackie said, that students aren't expected to be on every hour on the hour to just be somewhere for attendance. Has not ever been something with charter schools and innovation that we've worried so much about seat time, and really it to be on demand on the part of the students. When the students want math help, they can work asynchronously until they need help, and then the math teacher is there ready to help. Looking at the virtual campus model, and then each learning manager or advisor also held a live advisory that was looking through the advisory lessons, helping students, bringing students together, and if they couldn't make it, they could watch the recording. So I think as high school students before COVID and even more so after COVID, helping with families, working in potential jobs. We have a lot of students working in retail who were working more hours in COVID than ever before, having other responsibilities. We have a lot of students working in the medical field. So making sure that the flexibility that they need is still there and for them to access the education in a way that they want it. I think that's going to be the new demand of the future for innovative schools, is that students are busy. Once the pandemic, looks a little bit different, students are busy doing lots of different things and have lots of different opportunities. So continuing to look at that flexibility is always a huge part for us. Thank you.
Great. Cedric, what about yourself?
Yeah, real briefly, I echo what everyone said regarding having a healthy mix between synchronous and asynchronous learning. I think that is a very important point to continue to hammer home. One other thing that I think might be helpful to mention is also incorporating some type of social emotional learning component into your distance learning environment, because things like life skills and things of that sort are very important. But just to kind of stay connected to the students where they are emotionally and things of that sort, we've tried to incorporate that type of curriculum in a synchronous way and asynchronous way into our platform, and we found that that's something that has been well received by a client base and by the community. Also, one other thing is trying to make sure that you have a very deliberate way of communicating with families, having a component in your distance learning model that includes families, so that they're receiving communication and there's a vehicle for them to provide feedback, and so that that connection isn't lost because you aren't having necessarily parent teacher conferences and meetings face to face as you would in a traditional setting. And then the last point I wanted to make is also having a way to measure learning. There's multiple ways to measure learning, but having a way to measure that learning is taking place in a distance education setting when you lack that physical touch and and contact with the student, truly understanding that they are learning the things that are actually being delivered to them through instruction. And sometimes that's through assessment, but other times I think there's room for some type of synchronous engagement with the student to make sure those things are happening, whether it be small group breakouts in a Zoom or Google Classroom setting or something like that, but to have a more one-on-one with the student to ensure that learning is really taking place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just want to remind the attendees, please put in questions in the chat. Would love to hear, what you're thinking, grappling with, what questions you have. I do want to go back, Jackie, you brought up something that I think is a great point, like this idea that like not everything translates across modalities, right? And I think, that's something that's come up a lot with our partners that we work with, which are independent schools, mom and pop charter schools that are part of CMOs, private parochial, just understanding and being aware that it isn't about translating, it's about figuring out the best way to approach teaching and learning based on the current reality. And I think, it just takes time, and it takes some trial and error sometimes, and sometimes you just got to grapple with it. But I think school leaders, district leaders, even teachers, like we should feel comfortable experimenting with what does and doesn't work, because it isn't as easy as saying what I did in front of my students in person, I can now do it remotely. And sometimes unpacking that it's hard. But I think the more refined we can get in that area, the better we're going to be able to meet student need. And then think about that when we're not in crisis mode anymore, right? Like, how do we keep this going when we talk about the needs of our stakeholders, when we're trying to meet them, which I think could be really, really, really dynamic. And then Cedric, something you said, like this idea that like, how do you approach it when like you don't have the physical touch, right? Like you're not physically there. I think even zooming that out a little bit, like I think schools should feel comfortable saying like there could be aspects of what we fundamentally believe or what's core to our model that we can't do right now. Right? Like there might be some things that were sacred and truly a part of the school's DNA that have to just be put on pause because it can't easily translate without that physicalness. And that's okay. Right? Like that's what made your school what it is. That's what made it so special. That's what made it a choice that families were eager to be a part of, or their voice is what caused it, like what created it. And I think while it's frustrating to think that we can't do that right now, I think it's also really like special and empowering to think about like this is so special in how we do it and why we do it, that like we haven't figured out how to do it in hopefully like 100-year pandemic, right? Like it should be hard, because what makes our schools unique is what makes us fill that choice and that want that parents and kids and teachers have. And I know it's hard to think about not being able to do what we want to do for those who are here to serve, but sometimes that's also a positive. What we're doing is so unique, it's so special, that you can't just do it at the drop of a hat in a totally new way that we never thought about before March. So I think we should lean into that. So again, participants, please put in questions in the chat. I do have a question for all three of you, and I don't know what order you're on in my screen or on your screens, but in mine it's Tracy, Jackie, then Cedric. So we're just going to go on that for this one. I would love to hear, like, what's one thing that your school or your partners did before COVID that you're not doing now and you won't do again? Like, it could be a ritual, it could be a practice, it could be, some sort of norming structure. But is there something that you always did before COVID, and now, since you haven't been able to do it, you're realizing it's not core, it's not essential, and you're not going to do it moving forward?
Yeah, this is Tracy. I think for us, we have what's called individual graduation plan meetings as a high school. So we really held firm to, even if the students were an hour and 10 minutes away, that we wanted those face to face, the one time that they would come in the building, get all their forms signed, see the building, get their passwords, and kind of, blast off into virtual learning. But we have found new mechanisms for, signing, using DocuSign, using different ways of getting forms back. And teachers have just really crafted new scripts on synchronous tools and able to do that, letting families see the materials ahead of time. And I think sometimes when we knew students weren't going to spend a lot of time on campus and they were with us, we were just overwhelming them in that hour meeting, hour and 10-minute meeting, and it was too much. Where now we can break it up into 3 half-hour meetings and check in with them for 15 minutes after the first week to make sure that they did understand everything that we talked about, and they understand how much time they should be on the instructional curriculum and how much they should be moving forward if they do want to graduate at the end of the year, and what that means to a high school student. So I think we have just needed to let that go, let that one piece go that was so tied to face meeting that person and seeing that person in a different way, that it's actually been really good for us.
We can't hear you, Jackie. No. Nope. We still can't, but it's saying you're muted. So how about we go to Cedric, and then we'll come back to you. Hopefully you got it figured out.
Okay, so one of the things that I would say from my perspective as a vendor is we traditionally did not lead our conversations with schools that we're trying to support with focal point on remote learning or distance learning. It was something that we had incorporated in our tools, but it was not something that we led our conversations with. We focused a lot of our energy on assessment and data and standards-based grading and all of these other components that were more analytical types of things, but we didn't focus heavily on that. So one thing I know that we're going to do now and going on in the future is, because we've invested time and energy in beefing up the remote learning space of our platform, that's going to be something that we won't abandon, and we'll continue to have lead-in conversations about the power of this tool and what this tool can do in support of anytime something like this, like a pandemic, might happen. You have the ability of something that's already seated in your school district inside a platform you've invested in that has these additional capabilities, whether you're using them today or tomorrow.
No.
Oh, no.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. All right, that's all of our time. We're going to wrap up.
On my metal roof, and I didn't want you guys to hear all that noise. I think one of the most important things was always just making sure that as a school that we're never compromising our core values, right? So, there were things that our state and our governor was asking for us, in the classroom, that we wanted to make sure that what we were asking our teachers and our students to be able to do if they were face to face still didn't compromise our core values. So that was really, really important for us to keep those four, on the forefront. And then also we realized that we had been pretty lax as far as our consistency and what we were asking, our teachers to do. And so one of the things that we did was produce some non-negotiables, and we just, required a little bit more of our people in our system. So we made intermediate math non-negotiables, where these were the things that you need to do related to, good math instruction as we understand it. And the same thing with primary reading. That was one of our, we call them BHAGs. Our superintendent lovingly has created big, hairy, audacious goals for us, and we have one in the area of, reading fluency, and then even using our learning management system. So, that was, I think, something that will continue in the future, are those non-negotiables. And then just being able to focus on, really what's essential, really what are our core values, and, putting our attention and all of our resources and our time and energy into those things. So.
Gotcha. Great.